Rick is still with us. We also want to bring in Bill Kristol. He's a Bulwark's editor-at-large and also host of Conversations with Bill Kristol. Bill, it's great to talk to you here. So let's start with some of the targeted attacks that we heard from the GOP contenders when it comes to the language that they use about the frontrunner right now, former President Donald Trump. What do you think of this strategy? They haven't really been able to close the gap meaningfully when it comes to the leader here. Is that going to help? Is this going to help?
I don't think it did much damage to Trump. You said they put on the boxing gloves, which I guess is true, but there were a lot of jabs. There were not any big uppercuts or knockout punches, that's for sure, against Trump. So they're still kind of intimidated. I very much agree with Rick's substantive analysis of the debate. I would say from a political point of view, from the point of view of how does this affect the actual Republican race, it doesn't affect it much, except that there needs to be, if there's any chance of beating Trump, a consolidation behind basically one anti-Trump candidate, non-Trump candidate. And I think Haley has been the logical person for that to be that. Over the last few weeks, she's emerged, and I think she continued to last night. I thought she did pretty well. And if you're a pro helping Ukraine, pro understand foreign policy is important, don't like Trump's character, I've got to think there'll be more consolidation towards Haley. Whether that matters, whether it just means that she loses to Trump, 65-35 in a bunch of primaries, that's entirely possible. But I think that in terms of what I watch for in the next week, 2, 3, until the next debate is, does Scott get out? Do donors move, some DeSantis donors, maybe some Christie donors also move to Haley? And does it become pretty clear that we're going to end up with Trump versus Haley?
Hey, guys. I would add, when you ask the question, why are these candidates in it, even though Donald Trump is leading by so much? I mean, they have to be thinking, not just that they want to go one-on-one with Donald Trump in the primaries, but what if Trump drops out? I mean, this is a non-trivial possibility. He's facing 4 criminal trials. Some of those will be underway and perhaps concluded by probably by Election Day and possibly by the time of the Republican convention next summer. So what if Trump is a convicted felon in 9 months? What changes about any of these candidates? And that's, I guess, that is when all of this starts to matter a little bit more. But the question of consolidation, these candidates all get behind one person? That does not seem to be the case. So going to the primaries, you could have 4 candidates or 5 with all these candidates sort of splitting the anti-Trump vote.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe, Rick, I think that's a key political question. They could do that foolishly, and then we'll be in 2016 again, and Trump will coast. Pence has already gotten out. Other minor candidates have gotten out. Will Hurd. I think Scott is out in the next few weeks, actually. And then I think Christie faces a tough choice maybe after Iowa when he can't win the nomination. He doesn't want Trump to win. Doesn't he get behind Haley? You could end up with Trump, DeSantis, Vivek, I guess he stays in, and just to infuriate the other candidates and 2/3 of the audience, and Haley, and that I think has a slightly different dynamic. And then there is some chance that an actual conviction of Trump in D.C., perhaps in April, in the trial that's going to begin March 4th on January 6th, could make a difference. One other point that's kind of amazing to me, though, as a sort of ex-Republican who thinks January 6th was kind of an important day in American history, and it says a lot about our former president, Donald Trump, who's the GOP frontrunner. January 6th was not mentioned last night. Vivek had one mention of J6 prisoners, whom he seems to be very sympathetic to, literally not mentioned. So a 2-hour debate for the 2024 Republican nomination for president. January 6th, kind of a big deal since the last Republican nomination for president, not mentioned.
So, but what does that then tell us about the GOP party, where we stand today?
It says that even the ones who aren't Trump are scared of Trump and scared of mentioning January 6th, because, hey, if you mention January 6th, the question of, well, what happened in the last election comes up. And should Trump have been held more accountable for that? What about impeachment and conviction in the Senate? And what about these criminal trials? Do you think it's proper for him to be tried for January 6th or for the classified documents or for the other state charges that he's up on? It raises a whole bunch of issues that are kind of important for the country, but these Republican candidates don't want to talk about.
Bill, what about these recent polls from the New York Times showing Trump ahead of Biden in the swing states? I mean, it's a year before the election. What can Biden plausibly do to shore up his odds, assuming he is running against Donald Trump during the next 12 months?
Look, voters don't want a Trump-Biden matchup, and they're probably going to get Trump. So in a weird way, they take that out a little bit on Biden, and they do think he's too old. They don't disapprove. I mean, they do disapprove of some of Biden's policies. They're in an anti-incumbent mood. They don't like inflation, obviously, and all that. But as we saw on Tuesday night, the Democrats match up okay with the Republicans. It's not overwhelming, but Pennsylvania, in a way, the quintessential swing state, a must-win for both parties, I'd say, a year from now, in a kind of straight up Supreme Court race, which was basically just a Democrat-Republican, ballot test. The Democrat won by about 5 points. So the Democrats are doing okay in some of the key states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, here in Virginia. But Biden is not, in my view, the best Democratic candidate. I do think if it were Gretchen Whitmer or Josh Shapiro or one of the Democratic governors running against Trump, they would have a much safer path to the presidency. But Biden doesn't seem to agree with that, and he seems to want to run again. So we'll test the proposition of whether Biden is a drag on the Democrats or whether at the end of the day, people take a look at Biden and the Democrats and Trump and the Republicans, and you go back to something slightly favoring, more like 2020, slightly favoring the Democrats. But I do think it's foolish for people to say those polls don't matter. They don't tell us anything. And final point, the notion that polls a year out don't matter, sometimes they don't if people don't know the candidates. Everyone knows Biden. Everyone knows Trump. They've been president for the last 7 years. What new information are people going to get that's going to move them from their current Trump +2, +3, +4 in the swing states? They might get some. They might be reminded again of January 6th. They might be reminded of some things Trump did. But this is like to put it in business terms, two very well established brands, right? How many people change between Coke and Pepsi in a year? That people have kind of made up their mind about that. So I think my Democratic friends who are sort of saying these polls don't matter, I think that's wishful thinking.
Bill, real quick, we're running out of time here, but I want to get your thoughts on the deadline next week. We talk about the GOP party, the likelihood here, the fact that it's still a very divided party, the fact that we could get a government shutdown, no agreement ahead of that deadline next week. How likely is that?
I've assumed it wouldn't happen. It just seems so foolish, but I now worry that it could happen. There's more disarray than I realized among Republicans, between the Republican Senate and the Republican House. Could be a shutdown, could be a continuing resolution for a month or something like that, because they can't bridge the gap, apparently, on Ukraine and some other issues. Mm-hmm. But then it could be a shutdown in December. So I'm more worried about a shutdown than I have been.
All right, Bill Kristol, Rick Newman, thanks as always for breaking down the latest down in the Beltway down in D.C.